The room was silent. The kind of silence that usually comes right before a gunshot. In the center of the most exclusive, dangerous restaurant in New York City sat Lorenzo Moretti, a man who could end a life with a snap of his fingers. Nobody dared to breathe. Nobody dared to move. But then, the heavy oak doors didn't just open, they crashed against the walls. A tiny 4-year-old girl, soaked in rain and shaking like a leaf, sprinted past the armed guards. She didn't run to the exit. She ran straight to the deadliest man in the city, grabbed his expensive suit with muddy hands, and screamed, "He's coming! Please, hide me!" Lorenzo didn't push her away. He asked one question, and when he heard the answer, the devil himself stood up to go to war. This is the story of how a little girl melted a heart of ice and the chaos that followed. The rain in Manhattan wasn't washing the sins away. It was just making the streets slicker, dangerous, and dark. Inside the Gilded Lily, a private members-only club in Tribeca, the weather didn't matter. The air inside smelled of roasted garlic, truffles, and the metallic tang of fear. At the head of the long mahogany table sat Lorenzo Moretti. At 34, he was the youngest Don the Moretti crime family had ever seen, and easily the most ruthless. He wore a charcoal Brioni suit that cost more than most people's cars, and on his wrist sat a Patek Philippe watch that ticked away the seconds of the men sitting across from him. "You're telling me," Lorenzo said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that didn't quite mask the violence underneath, "that the shipment is missing?" The man across from him, a heavy-set dock union leader named Frank Miller, wiped a bead of sweat from his balding forehead. "Mr. Moretti, please. The feds, they were swarming the port. We had to dump it." Lorenzo didn't blink. He picked up his crystal glass of sparkling water. "You dumped $5 million of merchandise because you saw a patrol car." "It wasn't just a patrol car. It was a raid," Frank stammered. Lorenzo sighed. He hated incompetence more than he hated betrayal. He looked to his right, where his enforcer and best friend, Giovanni, stood like a statue. Giovanni's hand drifted toward the inside of his jacket. The room went deathly still. The other patrons of the club, politicians, judges, high-end escorts, averted their eyes. They knew the rules. When Lorenzo Moretti went quiet, someone was about to bleed. Lorenzo opened his mouth to give the order that would end Frank Miller's career, and likely his life, when a thunderous bang echoed from the front entrance. It wasn't a gunshot. It was the heavy double doors slamming against the walls. Every head in the restaurant whipped around. Giovanni had his gun drawn in a split second, aiming at the door. Lorenzo didn't flinch. He just narrowed his eyes. He expected a rival hit squad. He expected the FBI. He did not expect a child. She couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 years old. She was tiny, her blonde hair plastered to her skull by the freezing rain. She wore a pink dress that was torn at the hem and covered in mud, and she was missing a shoe. Her breath came in ragged, terrified gasps. 2 of the club's massive security guards chased after her. "Hey, you can't be in here," one shouted, reaching out a beefy hand to grab her shoulder. The girl let out a shriek that pierced the tense atmosphere of the lounge. She ducked under the guard's arm, scrambling on the polished floor. She looked around wildly, her blue eyes wide with panic. She wasn't looking for an exit. She was looking for a shield. Her eyes locked onto Lorenzo. Maybe it was because he was the only one not looking at her with annoyance. Maybe it was because he was sitting at the head of the table. Or maybe it was just fate. She sprinted. "Stop her!" Frank Miller yelled, trying to regain some authority. "Hold fire!" Lorenzo commanded, his voice slicing through the noise. Giovanni lowered his weapon slightly, but kept his finger on the trigger. The little girl didn't stop until she reached Lorenzo's chair. Without a shred of hesitation, she threw herself at him, burying her face into the expensive Italian wool of his trousers. Her muddy hands clutched his leg as if he were the only solid thing in a dissolving world. "Please!" she sobbed, her voice trembling so hard the words were barely audible. "Please don't let him get me." The entire restaurant gasped. Touching Lorenzo Moretti without permission was usually a death sentence. The security guards froze 10 feet away, looking at Lorenzo with terror, waiting for him to snap the child's neck or order her removal. Lorenzo looked down. He felt the damp cold of her clothes soaking into his leg. He saw the bruises on her small arms, finger marks, fresh ones, a dark, cold rage, different from the business-like anger he felt toward Frank, began to pool in his stomach. He placed a large hand on the girl's head. It was a gentle gesture, shocking everyone in the room. "Who?" Lorenzo asked softly. "Who is coming?" The girl looked up, tears streaming down her face, mixing with the rain. "The bad man. He says he's my daddy. But he hurts Mommy. He's outside. He's coming." Lorenzo looked up at the security guards. "Lock the doors." "But sir," the head of security stammered, "there's a man right behind her. He's shouting that he's—" "I said," Lorenzo's voice dropped to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream, "lock the doors." Before the guard could move, the doors were kicked open again. A man stood in the entryway. He was huge, wearing a soaked leather jacket and jeans. He had the distinct, arrogant posture of a man who was used to getting his way, bulky, red-faced, and radiating aggression. But what caught Lorenzo's eye wasn't the man's size. It was the badge hanging from his belt, a detective's badge, and the gun in his hand. The man scanned the room, his eyes wild, until they landed on the little girl clinging to the Mafia Don. "Get away from him, Mia," the man roared, stepping into the private club like he owned it. "You little brat, get over here now!" Lorenzo didn't move. He didn't stand up. He just stroked the little girl's hair, feeling her tremble violently against his leg. He looked at Giovanni. "Giovanni," Lorenzo said calmly, "bring the gentleman a chair. It seems we have a guest." 10 minutes earlier, Evelyn Vance was praying for a miracle inside a rusted 2015 Honda Civic parked 3 blocks away. She gripped the steering wheel so hard her knuckles were white. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "We have to run, Mia," she had whispered to her daughter in the back seat. "We have to run fast." Evelyn was beautiful, but she looked haunted. Her dark hair was messy, and there was a healing cut on her cheekbone, covered poorly with concealer. She had been running for 3 weeks, 3 weeks of cheap motels, paying in cash, and sleeping with one eye open. She had thought coming to New York was safe. It was big. It was easy to get lost in. But Matteo Thorne wasn't just an abusive ex-husband. He was a vice detective with the NYPD. He had resources. He had friends in low places. And he had a tracking device on her car she hadn't found until it was too late. When Matteo's black Dodge Charger had screeched around the corner, boxing them in against the curb, Evelyn had frozen. "Mummy," Mia had whimpered from the back seat. "Mia, listen to me," Evelyn had said, unbuckling her seatbelt with shaking hands. "When I open this door, I want you to run. You see that fancy building with the lights? The one with the men in suits outside?" "The Gilded Lily?" Mia asked, reading the sign she'd seen earlier. "Yes. You run inside. You find the biggest, scariest man you can find, and you tell him you need help. Do not stop for anyone. Do you understand?" "But what about you?" "I'll be right behind you. Go!" Evelyn had thrown the door open. Matteo was already out of his car, screaming, his face twisted in that familiar, drunken rage. He lunged for Evelyn, grabbing her by the hair. "You think you can leave me?" Matteo spat, yanking her back. "You think you can take my daughter? Run, Mia!" Evelyn screamed, clawing at Matteo's arm. She watched her daughter hesitate, then bolt down the sidewalk. Matteo raised his hand and backhanded Evelyn, sending her sprawling onto the wet pavement. The world spun. She tasted blood. But through the haze, she saw him turn and start chasing Mia. "No!" Evelyn scrambled to her feet, ignoring the pain in her ribs. She kicked off her heels and ran barefoot on the asphalt. She saw Mia slip through the doors of the club. She saw Matteo follow. Evelyn reached the doors a moment later, gasping for air. The security guard at the front tried to block her. "Ma'am, you can't! That's my daughter!" Evelyn shrieked, shoving past him with a strength she didn't know she had. She burst into the dining room just as the silence had fallen. The scene before her made her blood run cold. Her ex-husband, Matteo, was standing in the center of the room, his gun half raised. And there, sitting at the head of the table, was a man who radiated a different kind of danger. He was darkness personified, and Mia was clinging to his leg. Evelyn knew who Lorenzo Moretti was. Everyone in the city knew the name. He was the king of the underworld. If Matteo was a rabid dog, Lorenzo was a tiger. Evelyn froze. She was caught between two monsters. "I said, get over here, Mia!" Matteo yelled, taking a step forward. "And you!" He pointed his gun at Lorenzo. A foolish, drunken mistake. "Get your hands off my kid." Lorenzo finally stood up. The movement was fluid, graceful, and terrifying. He rose to his full height, 6'3" of tailored menace. He stepped in front of Mia, completely shielding her from her father's view. "I don't like loud noises while I'm eating," Lorenzo said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried to the back of the room. "And I certainly don't like dirty cops waving service weapons in my face." Matteo sneered, though a flicker of doubt crossed his eyes. "I'm Detective Matteo Thorne. I'm here for my runaway daughter and my wife. This is police business. Step aside, Moretti." "Police business," Lorenzo repeated, tasting the words. "It looks more like a domestic disturbance. And in my establishment, we have a strict dress code. You're violating it." "I have a badge!" Matteo shouted, stepping closer. "I can have this place raided in an hour." Lorenzo tilted his head. He looked past Matteo and saw Evelyn standing by the entrance, wet, bleeding, and terrified. Their eyes met. For a second, the world stopped for Lorenzo. He saw the desperation in the woman's eyes. He saw the same fierce protection he saw in the lionesses on the nature documentaries he secretly watched. She wasn't cowering. She was ready to die for the girl clinging to his leg. "Giovanni," Lorenzo said, never breaking eye contact with Evelyn. "Boss? Take the little girl to the kitchen. Get her some gelato. Strawberry." "No!" Matteo lunged forward to grab Mia. That was the mistake. Lorenzo moved faster than a man of his size should be able to. He caught Matteo's wrist, the one holding the gun, in a grip that sounded like a vice closing. There was a sickening crunch. Matteo screamed as the gun clattered to the floor. Lorenzo didn't let go. He twisted the arm behind Matteo's back and slammed the detective face first onto the table, right into a plate of calamari. "You come into my house," Lorenzo whispered into Matteo's ear. "You threaten a child, and you disrespect me." Lorenzo looked up at Evelyn. "Is this the man?" he asked her. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice shaking but clear. "Yes, that's him." Lorenzo nodded. He looked at the security guards. "Close the restaurant. Everyone out. The show is over." He looked down at Matteo, who was whimpering into the tablecloth. "Except you, detective. You and I need to have a conversation about manners." The silence in the Gilded Lily was now absolute, save for the whimpering of Detective Matteo Thorne. The restaurant had emptied out fast. The rich and powerful knew that when Lorenzo Moretti cleared a room, you didn't ask for a doggy bag. You ran before you became collateral damage. Only 4 people remained in the main dining hall: Lorenzo, Giovanni, Evelyn, and Matteo, who whose face was still pressed into the calamari. Lorenzo wiped his hands on a linen napkin, as if he'd just touched something mildly distasteful, like a dead fish. He walked around the table toward Evelyn. Up close, she was even more striking. Despite the bruise blooming on her cheek and the terror in her wide, intelligent eyes, she stood tall. She wasn't trembling anymore. "You're bleeding," Lorenzo said quietly, observing the cut on her cheekbone. Evelyn touched her face, wincing. "I'm fine." "Where is Mia?" "She's eating ice cream in a kitchen that costs more than this building." "She's safe." Lorenzo's eyes shifted from her to the man on the table. "He, however, is not." Lorenzo nodded at Giovanni. The massive enforcer grabbed Matteo by the back of his leather jacket and hauled him upright. Matteo's nose was gushing blood, broken, and his right wrist hung at an unnatural angle. "Do you know who I am?" Matteo sputtered, spitting blood onto the expensive carpet. "I'm a decorated officer of the NYPD Vice Squad. If I don't check in, every cop in this city will be kicking down your doors." Lorenzo stepped into Matteo's personal space. The air temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Matteo Thorne. Gambling debts up to his eyeballs in Atlantic City. 3 excessive force complaints filed in the last 2 years, all mysteriously buried by internal affairs. And a nasty habit of using his fists on women and children. Matteo went pale beneath the blood. "How do you—" "I make it my business to know the filth in my city so I don't step in it," Lorenzo said coldly. "You think your badge protects you here? In my world, that piece of tin is just jewelry. You pulled a gun in my establishment. You threatened a child under my protection. By the old laws, you shouldn't leave here walking." "Lorenzo," Giovanni said, his voice a low rumble of warning. "Killing a cop, even a dirty one, was bad for business. It brought heat that lasted for years." "I know," Lorenzo murmured. He looked at Evelyn. She was watching him, not with the revulsion he usually saw in civilians, but with a calculating assessment. She was trying to figure out if she'd traded one devil for another. "Why is he chasing you so hard?" Lorenzo asked her directly. "A man like him doesn't risk kicking down my door just because his wife left him. He's desperate. Why?" Evelyn hesitated. She looked at Matteo, who glared back with venomous hatred. "Shut your mouth, Evelyn," Matteo snarled. "You say a word, and I swear to God—" Giovanni backhanded Matteo across the face. It wasn't a full-force blow, just a reminder of who held the power. Matteo slumped, groaning. "He's desperate," Evelyn said, her voice gaining strength, "because I have something he needs, something that will send him to prison for the rest of his life, and half his unit with him." Lorenzo raised an eyebrow. This just got interesting. It wasn't just a domestic rescue mission anymore. It was business. "Giovanni," Lorenzo commanded, "take Detective Thorne down to the cellar. Put him in the meat locker. Cool him off. Make sure he doesn't use a phone." "You can't do this!" Matteo screamed as Giovanni dragged him away. "You'll regret this, Moretti." When they were gone, the large dining room felt strangely intimate. Lorenzo turned his full attention to Evelyn. "You can't go back out there tonight," he stated. It wasn't an offer, it was a fact. "He has friends on the force. If they find you before I know what this is all about, you're dead." Evelyn knew he was right. She had exhausted her resources. She had no money, no car, and nowhere to run. "Where can we go?" "My home." Evelyn took a sharp breath. Going to a secondary location with a Mafia don was usually the beginning of a very bad ending in the movies. Lorenzo saw her hesitation. "If I wanted to hurt you, Evelyn, I wouldn't have stopped him. You came to me for sanctuary. You have it. I give you my word." In Lorenzo Moretti's world, his word was worth more than gold. It was unbreakable. Evelyn looked into his dark, intense eyes, searching for deception. She found only a terrifying, steel-hard resolve. "Okay," she whispered. An hour later, a convoy of 3 armored SUVs left the back alley of the Gilded Lily. Lorenzo sat in the back of the middle vehicle, Mia asleep on his lap, wrapped in his suit jacket. Evelyn sat beside him, staring out the tinted window as the rain blurred the city lights. They didn't head to a penthouse in the city. They drove north, out of Manhattan, toward the heavily wooded estates of Westchester County. They arrived at iron gates that were 12 feet high, manned by armed guards who nodded deferentially as the cars passed. The estate was massive, a stone fortress disguised as a mansion, built in the 1920s by a bootlegger who needed to see enemies coming from a mile away. Evelyn carried a sleeping Mia inside, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the marble foyer. It was beautiful, cold, and imposing, much like its owner. Lorenzo led them upstairs to a guest suite larger than Evelyn's entire old apartment. There are clothes in the closet that should fit. The bathroom is stocked. Giovanni and his men are patrolling the perimeter. No one gets in here unless I allow it. Sleep. He turned to leave. "Mr. Moretti," Evelyn called out softly. He stopped, his hand on the doorknob. "Lorenzo! Lorenzo!" She tested the name. It felt heavy on her tongue. "Thank you for saving her." He didn't turn around. "I didn't do it for thanks. Get some rest. Tomorrow, you tell me everything." He closed the door. Evelyn listened to his heavy footsteps retreat down the hall. She locked the door, then dragged a heavy armchair in front of it. Old habits died hard. She curled up on the massive bed next to her daughter, inhaling the scent of expensive leather and sandalwood that clung to Mia from Lorenzo's jacket. For the first time in 3 weeks, she closed her eyes and actually slept. The morning sun hit the Moretti estate with a brilliance that felt almost insulting after the chaos of the night before. Lorenzo was awake before dawn. He was always awake before dawn. He sat in his study on the first floor, nursing an espresso, looking out the French windows at the sprawling green lawns. His mind was a chessboard, moving pieces. Matteo Thorne in the freezer, the police commissioner who owed Lorenzo 3 favors, the union issues at the docks, and the woman upstairs. He hadn't expected to feel protective. He dealt in violence, in transactions, in loyalty bought and sold. But when that little girl had grabbed his leg, something ancient and dormant had woken up inside him. And when he saw Evelyn standing in the rain, ready to fight a losing battle for her child, he recognized a kindred spirit. She was a soldier. He heard soft footsteps in the hall. He turned to see Mia standing in the doorway of the study. She looked different, dry. Her blonde hair was a halo around her small face. She was wearing an oversized t-shirt that must have come from the guest closet, dragging on the floor like a gown. "Hello," Lorenzo said, his voice instinctively softening. Mia stared at him with huge blue eyes. She wasn't scared anymore, just intensely curious. She walked into the room, bypassing him entirely, and went to a large antique globe in the corner. "My daddy says the world is bad," she said matter-of-factly, spinning the globe with a small finger. Lorenzo watched her. "Your daddy is wrong about a great many things." "Are you a bad man?" She stopped spinning the globe and looked at him. Children cut right to the heart of things. Lorenzo considered lying, but he respected her too much for that. "Some people think so." "Yes." Mia processed this. "But you stopped the bad thing from happening, so you can't be all bad, like Batman. He scares people, but he helps." A ghost of a smile touched Lorenzo's lips. It was a rare event, like a solar eclipse. "Batman, I like that." Mia! Evelyn's frantic voice echoed from the hallway. She rushed into the study, her hair damp from a shower, wearing a white silk robe she'd found in the room. She froze when she saw Mia standing next to the Don. "I'm sorry," Evelyn gasped, rushing to grab Mia's hand. "She woke up before me. We shouldn't be in here." "It's fine," Lorenzo said, standing up. The movement made Evelyn flinch slightly, a reaction that sent a spike of anger through Lorenzo. Not at her, but at the man who had conditioned her to fear sudden movements. "Did you sleep?" Lorenzo asked. "Yes. The bed is very comfortable." She looked around the study, taking in the dark wood, the smell of old books and cigar smoke. It was a masculine room, powerful and intimidating. Giovanni brought breakfast to the dining room. "Eat. Then we talk." Half an hour later, Mia was settled in the media room, with a cartoon on a screen the size of a movie theater wall, watched over by a very serious-looking bodyguard named Luca, who looked completely baffled by the presence of a child. Lorenzo led Evelyn onto the terrace overlooking the gardens. The air was crisp. He poured her coffee from a silver pot. "Tell me," he said. No preamble. Evelyn wrapped her hands around the warm cup. She knew this was the moment of truth. Her safety depended on how valuable her information was to him. "Matteo isn't just Vice," she began, her gaze fixed on the distant tree line. "About a year ago, he started coming home later. Different, more aggressive. He had new watches, new cash stashed in the drywall in the garage. He said it was confiscated funds, but I knew he was lying." Lorenzo nodded. "Standard corruption." "Go on." "He started having meetings at the house when he thought I was asleep. Men with accents, Eastern European." Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. "The Bratva." The Russian mob had been trying to push into the Queen's ports for months. They were sloppy, violent, and lacked discipline. Lorenzo despised them. 2 weeks ago, he got drunk, passed out in his home office. He left his safe open. Evelyn took a deep breath. "I found a ledger and a flash drive. I took them. I grabbed Mia, packed a bag, and I ran." "What's on the drive, Evelyn?" She looked him square in the eyes. "Everything. Payments from the Bratva to half of the Vice squad to look the other way on their trafficking shipments. Names of judges on the payroll, and notes on a planned hit. A high-profile target to create chaos in the city so the Russians could move in during the confusion." Lorenzo felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "Who was the target?" Evelyn's voice dropped to a whisper. "You." The silence on the terrace was profound. Lorenzo didn't move, didn't blink. The pieces fell into place. The pressure at the docks, the sudden boldness of certain rivals. The Russians were paying the cops to clear the board for them, and Matteo Thorne was their bagman. If Matteo had caught Evelyn, she would be dead. Mia would likely be dead. Collateral damage to keep the secret. And Lorenzo would have been walking into an assassination attempt within the week. This woman, running for her life in tattered shoes, had just saved his empire. Evelyn reached into the pocket of the robe and pulled out a small silver USB drive. Her hand shook slightly as she held it out to him. "He said if I ever told anyone, he'd make me watch him kill Mia before he killed me," she whispered, tears welling up but not falling. "I don't want money, Lorenzo. I don't want anything from you. Just, please make sure he can never touch us again." Lorenzo looked at the small device in her palm. It was a bomb that could level half the NYPD and start a war in the streets. He slowly reached out and took it, his fingers brushing hers. Her skin was soft, but her hand was strong. He closed his fist around the drive. "Evelyn," he said, his voice deeper, rougher than before. He waited until she met his gaze. The intensity of his stare was almost unbearable. Matteo Thorne is a dead man walking. He just doesn't know it yet. And as for you and Mia, he stepped closer to her, the air between them charged with sudden, unexpected electricity. You are under the protection of the Moretti family now, and anyone who wants to get to you will have to burn the city to the ground to do it. Evelyn felt a strange sensation in her chest, a mixture of overwhelming relief and something else, a pull toward this dangerous, beautiful man who spoke of violence as a promise of safety. For the first time in years, standing next to the most dangerous man in New York, she didn't feel afraid. She felt safe. Lorenzo turned away abruptly, needing to break the tension before he did something foolish, like touch her face. "Stay inside," he ordered, his voice clipped again. "I have work to do." He walked back into the house, his mind already racing with plans for war. But beneath the strategy, a new realization was taking root. He wasn't just fighting for his territory anymore. He was fighting for her. The basement of the Moretti estate was nothing like the polished marble of the floors above. It was damp, smelling of earth and iron. This was where the ugly work happened, so the world above could remain beautiful. Lorenzo walked down the concrete steps, the sleeves of his white dress shirt rolled up to his elbows. Giovanni followed, closing the heavy steel door behind them. In the center of the room, tied to a wooden chair under a single flickering bulb, sat Detective Matteo Thorne. He looked bad. His nose was swollen to the size of a plum, and he was shivering uncontrollably from his time in the freezer unit at the restaurant. When he saw Lorenzo, he didn't scream, he just whimpered. "Comfortable, Detective?" Lorenzo asked, leaning against a workbench covered in tools that no mechanic would ever use on a car. "I want a lawyer," Matteo croaked, his voice cracking. Lorenzo laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "You're not in a precinct, Matteo. You're in a hole in the ground in Westchester. There are no lawyers here. There is only me. And the truth." Lorenzo picked up a heavy wrench, weighing it in his hand. "Evelyn gave me the drive." Matteo froze. The last shred of color drained from his face. She didn't. She did. I've seen the accounts. I've seen the payouts from the Bratva. Dmitry Volkov. That's who you sold your soul to, isn't it?" Matteo squeezed his eyes shut. "If I talk, they kill me. If I don't talk, you kill me. I'm dead either way." "That's true," Lorenzo agreed pleasantly. "But there is fast, and there is slow. And Matteo, I have a lot of time today." He took a step closer. "The drive mentions an insider, someone in my organization who opened the door for the Russians. Who is it?" Matteo shook his head violently. "I don't know. I just dropped the money at a dead drop. I never saw his face." Lorenzo swung the wrench. He didn't hit Matteo. He smashed the wooden arm of the chair, sending splinters flying. Matteo screamed, curling in on himself. "Liar!" Lorenzo roared, his composure cracking. "My men are dying on the docks because of you. A rat is eating my food and sleeping in my house. Give me the name." "It's Salvo," Matteo shrieked, tears mixing with the blood on his face. "It's Salvatore, your uncle. He said you were too young. He said you were soft. He made the deal with Volkov." Lorenzo stood frozen. The wrench slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the concrete. Salvatore. Uncle Sal. The man who had taught him how to tie a tie. The man who had sat at Sunday dinner with him for 30 years. The man who had sworn on Lorenzo's father's grave to protect the family. "Giovanni," Lorenzo said, his voice barely a whisper. Giovanni looked sick. "Boss, Sal is upstairs. He arrived an hour ago for the meeting. He's in the library." Lorenzo stared at the wall. The betrayal didn't feel like a knife in the back. It felt like the floor dropping out from under him. But a Don does not grieve in front of his enemies. He turned back to Matteo. "Keep him here," Lorenzo ordered. "If he makes a sound, cut out his tongue." Lorenzo walked up the stairs, buttoning his cuffs. By the time he reached the top, the heartbreak was gone. In its place was a cold, Arctic fury. He walked into the main hall. The house was quiet. He needed to find Sal, but first he needed to check on Evelyn. He found her in the kitchen. She was making a sandwich for Mia. It was such a domestic scene, the sunlight hitting the granite countertops, the smell of peanut butter, that it jarred him. Evelyn looked up, sensing his presence. She saw the look in his eyes instantly. "What happened?" she asked, putting down the knife. "Go to your room," Lorenzo said, his voice tight. "Take Mia, lock the door. Do not open it for anyone but me or Giovanni, not even for family." "Lorenzo, you're scaring me." "Good. Fear keeps you alive. Go, now." Evelyn grabbed Mia's hand and ran. Lorenzo watched them go, ensuring they made it to the stairs. Then he turned toward the library. He pushed the double doors open. Uncle Sal was sitting in a leather armchair, reading a newspaper, a glass of scotch in his hand. He was an older man, 60, with silver hair and a grandfatherly face. He looked up and smiled. "Lorenzo, there you are. Giovanni said you had business in the cellar. Everything all right?" Lorenzo walked to the wet bar and poured himself a drink. He didn't look at Sal. "We have a problem, Uncle. The shipment last week, the one the feds hit. It wasn't bad luck." Sal sighed, shaking his head. "I told you, Lorenzo. These things happen. The business is getting harder." "It gets harder when the people you love sell you to the Russians." Lorenzo turned, glass in hand. The room went silent. The ticking of the grandfather clock sounded like a bomb countdown. Sal's smile didn't fade, but it became rigid, like a mask. "That's a heavy accusation, nephew." "Matteo Thorne talked," Lorenzo lied. "He gave me everything. The meetings, the payouts, the promise that Volkov would make you Don once I was out of the way." Sal stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he set his drink down. The grandfatherly warmth evaporated, replaced by a sneer of contempt. "You were always too soft, Lorenzo. You run this family like a corporation. No guts, no fire. Your father would be ashamed." "My father didn't sell his blood to foreign butchers." Lorenzo stepped forward, his hand drifting to the Beretta holstered under his jacket. "I did what I had to do to save this family." Sal stood up, shouting now. "Volkov is the future. You are a relic." "And you," Lorenzo said, drawing his gun, "are a disappointment." Before Lorenzo could fire, the library window behind Sal exploded. Glass showered the room. A red laser dot danced across Lorenzo's chest. He dove behind the heavy oak desk just as automatic gunfire shredded the room. "They're here!" Sal laughed maniacally, taking cover behind the sofa. "Volkov is here!" Lorenzo pressed his back against the wood, debris raining down on him. It wasn't just an assassination attempt. It was a siege. The betrayal ran deeper than he thought. Sal had led the enemy right to the front door. Lorenzo checked his magazine. "Full." "Giovanni," he shouted into his lapel microphone. "We are breached. South Lawn. Get the girl. Get Evelyn." The war had come home. The peaceful estate transformed into a war zone in seconds. The silence of the Westchester woods was torn apart by the thwop 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 of suppressed assault rifles and the shattering of glass. Upstairs, Evelyn screamed as the window in the hallway blew out. She threw herself over Mia, shielding her body with her own as glass sprayed across the carpet. "Mummy!" Mia wailed. "Get up, baby, get up!" Evelyn dragged Mia to her feet. The instinct that had kept them alive on the run kicked into overdrive. She didn't know the layout of the house well, but she knew the bedroom was a trap. It had windows. They needed a room with no windows. "The bathroom," Evelyn gasped. "Run to the bathroom." Downstairs, Lorenzo was moving. He popped up from behind the desk and fired 3 shots. 2 hit the window frame. The third caught a dark figure trying to climb through. The intruder fell back into the garden. Lorenzo looked at the sofa where Sal was hiding. "You let them in!" Lorenzo roared over the gunfire. "It's over, Lorenzo," Sal shouted back. "Surrender and Volkov might let you live." "I don't surrender to traitors." Lorenzo made a break for the door. Bullets chewed up the floorboards at his heels. He burst into the hallway just as the front doors were blown off their hinges by a concussive charge. Smoke filled the foyer. Shadowy figures in tactical gear swarmed in. Russian mercenaries. They weren't street thugs. These were pros. Giovanni appeared at the top of the stairs, dual-wielding pistols like an avenging angel. He rained fire down on the entryway, dropping 2 mercenaries and forcing the rest to take cover behind the marble pillars. "Get to the 2nd floor," Giovanni yelled at Lorenzo. "We have to hold the landing." Lorenzo sprinted up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. He met Giovanni at the top. "Where are they?" Lorenzo demanded, breathless. "Guest wing. I sent Luca, but I haven't heard from him." A cold dread gripped Lorenzo's heart. He pushed past Giovanni, running down the long corridor toward the room where he had left Evelyn. He found the door to the bedroom kicked open. Inside, the body of Luca, the bodyguard, lay motionless on the rug. The room was empty. "Evelyn!" Lorenzo screamed. A Russian mercenary stepped out of the bathroom, holding Mia by the back of her shirt. Mia was kicking and screaming, her small legs flailing. The mercenary had a knife pressed to her throat. "Drop the gun!" the mercenary shouted in thick, accented English. Lorenzo froze. His gun was raised, leveled at the man's head, but the shot was impossible. The man was using the child as a human shield. "Let her go," Lorenzo said, his voice shaking with a rage so profound his vision blurred. "She's a child! Drop it!" the mercenary yelled, pressing the knife harder. A thin line of red appeared on Mia's neck. Lorenzo slowly began to lower his weapon. He couldn't miss. He couldn't risk it. Suddenly, a shadow moved behind the mercenary. It was Evelyn. She had been hiding in the shower stall. She held a heavy porcelain lid from the toilet tank in her hands. Her face was a mask of primal, motherly fury. She didn't hesitate. She swung the heavy ceramic slab with every ounce of strength she possessed. Crack! The lid shattered over the mercenary's head. He crumpled instantly, his eyes rolling back, the knife falling harmlessly to the floor. Mia dropped, scrambling away. Lorenzo didn't wait. He surged forward, grabbing Evelyn and Mia, pulling them into his chest. "I've got you! I've got you!" Evelyn was panting, her hands shaking, staring at the unconscious man. He was going to... "You did good," Lorenzo said, gripping her face for a second, forcing her to look at him. "You did incredible, but we have to move. Now!" They ran back into the hallway. The house was filling with smoke. The alarm system was blaring a deafening siren. "Giovanni!" Lorenzo shouted. "Status!" "They're flanking us!" Giovanni yelled from the railing, reloading his clips. "Too many of them. We need to get to the panic room." "The basement," Lorenzo said, "through the servants' stairs." They moved as a tight unit. Lorenzo in front, Evelyn holding Mia in the middle, Giovanni covering the rear. They navigated the smoke-filled corridors, stepping over debris. Every shadow looked like an enemy. They reached the narrow servants' staircase. "Go," Lorenzo ordered. They descended into the darkness. The power had been cut. Lorenzo clicked on the tactical light on his pistol. The beam cut through the gloom. They reached the bottom landing, the same hallway where the interrogation room was. "The panic room is behind the wine cellar," Lorenzo whispered. "Move." Suddenly, the door to the interrogation room opened. Uncle Sal stepped out. He was holding a submachine gun. He wasn't smiling anymore. He looked desperate. "I can't let you do that, Lorenzo," Sal said, raising the gun. "If you live, I'm dead. Volkov won't pay me if you escape." Lorenzo pushed Evelyn and Mia behind him, shielding them with his body. "Sal, don't do this. You're family. We can fix this." "It's too late for family," Sal shouted. His finger tightened on the trigger. Bang! The shot was deafening in the confined space. But it didn't come from Sal's gun, and it didn't come from Lorenzo's. Sal looked down, a look of confusion on his face. A dark stain was spreading on his chest. He crumpled to his knees, then fell face forward. Behind him, in the doorway of the interrogation room, stood Matteo Thorne. The detective was leaning against the doorframe, barely standing. He had managed to free one hand from the broken chair. In that hand, he held a snub-nosed revolver, his backup piece, the one he kept in an ankle holster that Lorenzo, in his rage, had neglected to check for. Matteo looked at the smoking gun, then at Lorenzo. He looked at Evelyn, who was staring at him in shock. He was going to shoot the kid," Matteo rasped, blood bubbling on his lips. "I'm a bastard, but I don't shoot kids." Lorenzo lowered his gun, stunned. The man who had hunted them, the man who had caused all of this, had just saved their lives. "Get to the room," Matteo wheezed, sliding down the doorframe to sit on the floor. "There's more coming down the stairs." "Matteo," Evelyn said, taking a step toward him. "Go," Matteo yelled, coughing violently. "Go, Evelyn!" Lorenzo grabbed Evelyn's arm. "We have to go!" They rushed past Sal's body and the dying detective. Lorenzo punched a code into a hidden keypad behind a wine rack. The heavy steel wall hissed and slid open, revealing a fortified room lined with monitors and weapons. They scrambled inside. Giovanni dove in last, firing a few suppressing shots back up the hallway. Lorenzo hit the button. The steel door slammed shut, sealing them in with a heavy, final thud. The noise of the battle was instantly cut off. The panic room was silent, air-conditioned, and safe. Evelyn slid down the wall to the floor, pulling Mia into her lap. They were shaking. Lorenzo stood by the monitors, watching the grainy black and white feeds of his home being destroyed. He saw the mercenaries swarming with the hallway they had just left. He saw them find Sal's body. He saw them kick Matteo. But the detective didn't move. Lorenzo turned to look at Evelyn. She was covered in dust, her expensive dress torn, her legs bleeding from glass cuts. But she was alive. He knelt in front of her. "Are you hurt?" "No," she whispered. "Just scared." "We are safe here," Lorenzo promised. "This room has its own air, its own power. The walls are 2 feet of reinforced concrete. They cannot get in." "What do we do now?" Evelyn asked. Lorenzo looked at the monitors again. He saw the face of the man leading the mercenaries. Dmitry Volkov. The Russian was standing in Lorenzo's foyer, smashing a vase in frustration. Lorenzo's expression hardened into something terrifying. "Now?" Lorenzo said, walking over to a wall rack and pulling down a heavy assault rifle. He checked the action with a metallic clack. "Now we wait for the sun to come up. And when it does, I take back my city." The air inside the panic room was recycled, cool and silent, a stark contrast to the chaos burning above them. Hours had passed. Mia had finally cried herself to sleep on a cot in the corner, wrapped in a tactical blanket. Evelyn sat on the floor, her back against the cold steel wall, her legs drawn up to her chest. Lorenzo sat opposite her, cleaning his rifle with methodical, rhythmic movements. He hadn't spoken in an hour. He was listening to the radio chatter on a secured frequency. His capos from Brooklyn and Queens were mobilizing. The cavalry was coming. "Why?" Evelyn asked softly. breaking the silence. Lorenzo paused, a cloth in his hand. He looked up, his dark eyes weary but intense. Why what? Why did you do all this? You could have just taken the drive and thrown us out. You could have handed us to Matteo. You destroyed your home. You killed your own uncle. For a woman you met yesterday. Lorenzo set the rifle down. He stood up and crossed the small space between them, crouching down so he was eye level with her. In my world, Evelyn, loyalty is rare. It is the only currency that matters. You came to me. You trusted me with the life of your daughter. That is a sacred contract. He hesitated, his gaze dropping to her lips, then back to her eyes. And when I saw you standing in the rain, fighting for her, I saw something I haven't seen in a long time. I saw life. I saw fire. I didn't want to see that fire put out. Evelyn felt a blush rise to her cheeks, despite the dirt and blood. She reached out, her hand trembling, and touched the side of his face. His stubble was rough against her palm. I've spent my whole life running from men like you, she whispered. Men who control things. Men who use violence. I know, Lorenzo said, leaning into her touch. But I will never use it against you. I will burn the world to keep the ash from falling on you. That is my vow. He didn't kiss her. Not yet. It wasn't the time, but the promise hung in the air, heavier and more real than any wedding ring. Dawn broke over a ruined estate. The sensors in the panic room beeped. Green status, Giovanni announced, checking the monitors. The perimeter is secured. The Brooklyn crew is here. Lorenzo hit the release switch. The heavy hydraulics hissed, and the steel door groaned open. The hallway was a wreck. Bullet holes pockmarked the walls. But the silence was different now. It was the silence of victory. Lorenzo stepped out first, rifle raised. But there were no enemies left. Only his men. Dozens of them, wearing the Moretti family crest, standing guard over the bodies of the Russian mercenaries. A tall man in a sharp suit stepped forward. It was Marco, Lorenzo's second-in-command for the Brooklyn territories. Don Moretti, Marco bowed his head. The house is clear. Volkov tried to flee through the woods. We caught him. Where is he? Lorenzo asked, his voice devoid of emotion. In the garden. Waiting for you. Lorenzo nodded. He turned to Giovanni. Take Evelyn and Mia to the limo. Get them to the city penthouse. Call the doctor. No, Evelyn said, stepping out of the panic room. She held Mia's hand, but her chin was high. I'm not going anywhere. Not until this is finished. Lorenzo looked at her. He saw the steel in her spine. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was a survivor. Come, he said. They walked out into the garden. The morning sun was bright, illuminating the destruction. In the center of the rose garden, Dmitri Volkov was on his knees, his hands zip-tied behind his back. Two of Lorenzo's guards stood over him. Volkov looked up. His face was bruised, his expensive suit ruined. When he saw Lorenzo, he spat on the grass. This isn't over, Moretti, Volkov sneered. The Bratva does not forget. Neither do I, Lorenzo said. He didn't shout. He didn't make a speech. He simply raised his pistol and fired a single shot. Volkov fell. The threat was gone. Lorenzo turned to the guards. Clean this up. Send a message to the Russians. New York is closed for business. He walked back to Evelyn. She hadn't flinched at the gunshot. She looked at the body, then up at Lorenzo. It's over, she said, letting out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for years. Yes, Lorenzo said. It's over. They walked back toward the house. As they passed the servants' entrance, two men were carrying a body bag out on a stretcher. Lorenzo stopped them. He unzipped the bag slightly. It was Matteo Thorne. The detective looked peaceful in death, the rage finally wiped from his face. He had been a monster for most of his life, a corrupt cop and an abuser. But in his final second, he had chosen to be a father. "He saved us," Evelyn whispered, tears finally spilling over. "He killed Sal. He saved Mia." Lorenzo zipped the bag back up with respect. "He died a soldier's death. Give him a proper burial," Lorenzo ordered his men. "Not a cop funeral, a family funeral. He earned it." 6 months later, the Gilded Lily was buzzing. It was Friday night, and the most exclusive restaurant in Manhattan was packed. The doors opened. The room didn't go silent this time, but heads turned. They always turned for the king and queen of the city. Lorenzo walked in, looking as dangerous and elegant as ever in a black tuxedo. But he wasn't alone. On his arm was Evelyn. She was unrecognizable from the terrified woman in the rain. She wore a floor-length gown of emerald green silk that hugged her curves. Diamonds glittered at her throat, a gift for their engagement. Her head was held high, her eyes scanning the room with the confidence of a woman who owns the place. Because she did. And walking between them, holding both their hands, was Mia. Mia was dressed in a cute velvet dress, skipping slightly. She wasn't afraid of the guards, or the noise, or the city anymore. She knew that the monsters were gone. They reached the head table, the same table where Mia had first run to Lorenzo. Giovanni was there, pulling out a chair for Mia. "Uncle Gio," Mia chirped, climbing onto the seat. "Principessa," Giovanni grinned, handing her a menu that consisted entirely of desserts. Lorenzo sat down and took Evelyn's hand. He kissed her knuckles, ignoring the crowd watching them. "Happy?" he asked quietly. Evelyn looked around the room. She saw the respect in the eyes of the staff. She felt the warmth of Lorenzo's hand. She looked at her daughter, who was laughing at a joke Giovanni made. She thought about the rain. She thought about the fear. And she thought about the moment the devil himself had stood up to protect them. "Yes," Evelyn smiled, squeezing his hand. "I'm home." Lorenzo poured them both a glass of wine. He raised his glass. "To the storm," he said softly. Evelyn clinked her glass against his. "To the shelter." They drank. Outside, the rain began to fall on New York City, washing the streets clean. But inside, everything was warm, golden, and safe. And that is the story of how a desperate plea from a little girl changed the fate of the entire New York underworld. It's a reminder that sometimes the scariest people in the world can be the kindest, and that even in the darkest storms, you can find a shelter if you're brave enough to run toward it. Lorenzo didn't just save a family, he found one. If this story had your heart racing, please give this video a big thumbs up. It really helps the channel. What did you think of Matteo's final sacrifice? Did he redeem himself? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.